Hi, I'm Mitch, and welcome to the Restoration Road, where our guest today is the Director of Development and Vice President of the Rescue Mission in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Rich Cummins. You know, Rich is going to share transparently about a journey in his life, one that includes foolish choices, and finally, he sees the consequences of those choices, and he responds to the still small voice of God Almighty. And then he begins to experience wisdom a step at a time. And through that, he experiences restoration. You know, wisdom seems to be the means and the end of Restoration Road. God uses wisdom to restore our souls, to restore our lives. And as he does that, we grow in wisdom, and he uses us to bring his restoration to others. Before you watch and listen to Rich's testimony, I'd like to read to you Proverbs 12:15. Solomon records that the way of fools seem right to them, but the wise listen to advice. When we take control of our own lives and we take that away from God, we harden our hearts. And that's what a fool is. And just as wet cement hardens to become cured concrete, so we kind of start out with wet cement in our hearts, and then it just gets harder and harder, and oftentimes becomes cured concrete in our hardness toward God. And it doesn't work out so well. And all the while, we could have listened to wise advice. As you listen to Rich, why don't you ask the Holy Spirit to reveal any foolishness, any hardness of heart in you, and begin to listen to the advice, to the wisdom of the Spirit of God. We're here at Parkview Field, home of the Fort Wayne Tin Caps, our Summit Cities single-A baseball organization with San Diego Padres. And my guest today is my good friend, Rich Cummins. Rich, thank you for being here today.
Hey, Mitch.
You have an amazing story, and I want to get right to it. I want you to talk about growing up and what that was like.
My mother, she got pregnant for me at the age of 15, but she actually was escaping a pretty rough background herself. You see, by the age of 9, she had been physically, sexually, mentally, emotionally abused by a number of different people. And so she ended up looking for an escape, if you will, to get out of that environment. So my dad came along, and he was enamored with this beautiful young girl, and she got pregnant, and they ended up getting married, and she had me when she was 16. Wow. And they tried to make a go of it at a very early age. A lot of things that she had to deal with, and so being a new mother wasn't really going to work too well. So by the time I was about 18 months old, my mother had moved on, and my dad ended up raising me. So you can imagine a bachelor, if you will, raising a young man in the 70s.
Exactly.
It didn't happen too often.
Right. And you ended up, I think, going to a Bible school around that time where your aunt was working?
My aunt is actually a missionary now in the Baptist church.
Wow.
But at the time, she was running that VBS. And I came to know Jesus there, and it was amazing. I had never known him, you know, and I went through this moment where I just felt like the world stopped, and I just felt my heart on fire, and I had a flood of emotions and tears, and you know, with the troubled background that I'd come from, you know, I finally felt like I belonged.
It was real and authentic.
True.
Yeah.
There was no denying it.
Yeah, you could sense the Holy Spirit
Holy
in your
Spirit
life.
was in it.
Well, sometimes Restoration Road's 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Yeah.
So talk about, as you get a little older in school, how the turns your life took and some of the decisions you made.
Going through my high school years, as many kids do, I was trying to figure my way in the world, and at that point I was trying to I don't know, build an empire even at a young age. You know, I was very ambitious. In fact, in high school I was in JROTC, and I thought someday I'd be the next general, you know, General Eisenhower or somebody of that nature. And so I was really...
There's an ambition in you that we can see and we're going to see throughout the thread of your whole life. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, huge drive. But it was all about me, really.
Yeah.
And it was about this empire I was trying to build. You know, I was working my way to get the best grades possible. And so I ended up going through high school, very, very much motivated to get out of my circumstances. Very embarrassed about kind of my mom and my mom's side of the family and some of the things that I had seen. And, you know, I was very, very disturbed by a lot of that. And I didn't want a lot of people to know that. And so...
Growing up, you would live with your dad and go to your mom's on weekends, right?
I would.
And there was a bit of a conflict in environments, and so you wrestled with that tension.
Dichotomy, really. So on the one hand, I was in a very prim and proper side with my father and his family and the school that I attended. But then on the weekends, I would be around a lot of partying and drinking and these types of things. And so as a kid, it was a very confusing lifestyle and a very confusing message. So I was trying to work my way out of that. So by the time I got through high school, I started looking at my options for college. And along the way, I ended up joining the military. So I joined the National Guard. You know,
You're still in high school when you do that, right? At Concordia?
I was between my junior and senior year in high school.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Went to basic training. So here I was, a 17-year-old boy, basically, leading men that were in their late 20s and 30s. I was a platoon sergeant in basic training.
There's that drive and ambition.
Drive and ambition. I was set to again, build my own empire, if you will. So anyways, I ended up graduating from high school and, you know, feeling quite proud of myself, if you will, and off to college. Off to college I go. And
you go off to Purdue. You describe that you've interpreted your relationship with Christ as a little bit more of a religion up to that point. But before you go to Purdue, I assume you've been partying a little bit and just taking control of your own life back from God. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You're completely on track with that.
Okay.
I drinking a lot and partying, and I would say my relationship really it was rooted in tradition and religion, and the relational aspect with Christ really had been subdued for a long time. I really pushed that down. I didn't know how to embrace that at that point in my life. So would I have told you I'm a Christian? Absolutely. I'm in the club. You know, that's what I would have told you.
Yeah, I get that. So you're at Purdue, and you're living a pretty loose life, and describe that fateful night.
Yeah, so first year at Purdue, I end up becoming a little bit homesick, if you will. And so on October break, I decide to go back home and meet up with some friends and some family. And again, I chose to go hang out with my mom's side of the family. And so I got together with a family member, and he introduced me to some of his buddies. And, you know, I really had this sense that I wanted to belong. I wanted to be a part of something. That drove me with the military, too. I was looking for something deeper to be committed to. And so these guys had this little tight clique, and I thought, you know, it seems like they're having a good time. And so we hung out, and the party was rolling on, and before you know it, it was closing time. And it was time for everybody to head home and head to bed, but the party really didn't stop. And so somebody wanted to go grab something to eat. And
this is more like early morning breakfast.
Early morning breakfast, yeah. So before you know it, we end up at a guy's grandma's house. We're parked in the back alley. And a couple of fellows got out of the car along with my cousin, and they went to the house, and they came back with a gun. And I knew they weren't going to do anything good with that. I knew they were up to no good.
And are you driving?
I'm driving. It was my car.
And you're probably under the influence at that point?
Tanked.
Okay.
Tanked. Completely wasted. I'd been drinking all night and not making wise choices even up till that point. And so basically what happened was my cousin and a couple of these guys took that weapon, and they went down the street and they robbed a gas station. So before you know it, the two guys come back, not without a weapon. They had a weapon, and they got in my car, and they said my cousin was running. The police were after him.
He just fled on foot from the scene?
He fled on foot. And so I ended up with a situation to deal with. I could either stop, get out of the car, or I could drive away. well, I chose to drive away.
That's tough. That's a split-second decision. You've spent the last several hours with those guys partying. You feel like you want to belong. You're getting tighter as a group, and now, boom, you're presented, and you got to make a split-second decision with that conflict.
I'm in it at that point, and what do I do? And so, basically, I was more concerned about getting a DUI or getting stuck in that position, you know, busted by the police, than I was anything else. So I drove away. I drove with these guys, but along the way, I'm wondering about my cousin. I'm wondering, is he okay? You know, I did all of this to be around him. Now, all of a sudden, I took off.
Or now, are you driving in alleys? Or are you going 100 miles an hour away from the city? Like, where are you going?
Fast and furious.
Okay.
Doing everything we could to get to the other side of town.
Okay.
You see, my cousin and some of my family lived closer to New Haven at the time, and so we actually ended up getting to my cousin's house, and we waited there for a little while.
So you drove several miles?
Several miles.
Yeah, okay.
And I thought, we were gone. We had escaped that scene. And so it just dawned on me, I have to go back. I cannot leave him there. That was kind of the military part of me too, is just being, in a warped, weird sense, I felt dishonorable for having left him. And so I went back, and I told the guys with me, I said, look guys, you can stay or you can go with me. You can get out or we're going back. They stayed. We drove back to the scene of the crime. Lo and behold, I got pulled over by the police. And so the police interrogated me. My cousin had already been arrested, and he identified me as the getaway driver.
So you pretty much tell the truth at that point?
Absolutely.
And would you say you're no longer under the influence of alcohol at that point?
Well, hours had gone by.
So
I was taken downtown and put in a room, and I was interrogated. And so at that point, you know, obviously I had a moment of clarity, which was tell the truth. You know, I was in the National Guard. You know, I was kind of the all-American boy up till that point. And I just felt like I needed to do the right thing. Now, I didn't know much. I didn't know what they had been doing. I didn't know what their plans were. But I knew that I drove them away from a crime. And so I admitted that.
You know, I get what you're saying on the spiritual part of it. I remember one time falling on my knees by my bed. I remember the date like it was yesterday. And it's like the Holy Spirit took me on about a 10-year look in my rearview mirror, and I could not believe that I was my mother's son.
Yeah.
And when you said all-American, that's kind of what I was thinking too about how I felt. And so I get what you're thinking, how in the world did I get here? And it's kind of like my dad told me. He says, every day you wake up, you're going to have a Y in the road, and you're going to make a choice, and that choice is going to be wise or foolish. And when you get way over here someday, you're going to say, how'd I get here? And he said it was a choice at a time, a choice at a time. And Psalm 1 talks about that as well. It's powerful. Our choices are so powerful on the consequences they bring to our lives.
I wasn't consulting the Lord when I was sitting in that alley. I wasn't consulting the Lord when I chose to drink that night. You know, I was just making choices that had consequences attached to it.
The more we learn, the more that's a risk, because the risk is that we can trust in ourselves. You have a strong drive and ambition, and you're gifted. So it's challenging. I think it's more challenging for you than other people oftentimes to not trust in yourself. And so that's how there's always that risk in our sinful nature to go on autopilot. But I want to get back to your story. You confess that you are driving, and what happens?
So I have some options now. My attorney, I end up getting an attorney, and before even that, I had to tell my dad, and that was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. My dad is a man that took me and raised me from 18 months on. No mom in the picture, really. And he invested a lot in my life, a tremendous amount in my life. And I had to tell him that I just threw a lot of that away. And that was hard.
I believe it.
So he went ahead with my mom, and they both got an attorney for me. And the attorney basically said, you have a couple of options. We realize that you have a very, very minimal role in this, but understand this. If a jury finds you guilty, you'll do 10 years in prison for armed robbery. Or you can accept a plea bargain. The plea bargain would be just cooperate, and you will actually end up with a felony the rest of your life, but you can get probation, and you won't have to do any prison.
So Plan B sounds pretty good to you at that time?
Plan B made the most sense to me, and so I took Plan B. So I ended up staying in jail during that period of time for a few days, very embarrassed, very shameful, and then I ended up going back down to college. So I ended up getting back into class and hadn't missed a bunch of school up until that point.
At Purdue?
At Purdue. Mm-hmm. But what I didn't know as part of the process is when you have a felony to that level, the city or the county who brought charges against you originally has to dismiss those so the state can pick them up, because now it's more of a serious conviction. Mm-hmm. And so I had to be rearrested. Another shameful moment. My resident hall manager, if you will, brought the police to my door in my dorm room. They handcuffed me and walked me out. I walked straight down the hall, into the squad car, and off the campus.
Wow.
Humiliating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially for your frame of mind. Even though you're going through this trial, you're still ambitious, you're still moving ahead, you're still driving.
Yeah, it was, again, I had spent a lot of my life trying to hide the other side of me, my family, if you will, and now the issues that I'd brought on myself were exposed for the world to see. Mm-hmm. And so now I was arrested, and they ended up, I had to go through the court system, and I was on probation for a couple of years, and I really had to check myself. But here's the thing, though, Mitch. Being that ambitious, you would have thought that that would have brought me to my knees before Christ, but it didn't. It increased the drive. I even worked harder. So I ended up going back down to Purdue. I ended up graduating with honors. I was actually up for the Outstanding Senior Award. And the funny thing is, I was in a kind of like a pre-law program, wanting to go to law school. But there became that moment in time where I had to make a decision, because with a Class C felony, my chances of passing a bar weren't very good.
Yeah.
And so I had to make a decision. I ended up graduating, but I had to change the course for a career. So I ended up staying in Lafayette and working at a printing company there for just a short period of time. And I met a young lady there at Purdue. I met a young lady there that actually was from Fort Wayne, lived close to me in Fort Wayne, and we began dating.
And that relationship kind of goes 100 miles an hour, I guess, and gets microwaved.
Fast and furious, just like everything else. And so now that was one more box I wanted to check on the way up to my success in life. So we ended up dating for a short period of time. I ended up coming back to Fort Wayne, moving back to Fort Wayne to work with my father. And this was in November of 1995.
And he was in a printing business?
He was the third generation owner of a family printing company that had been around for about 50 years. He had about 40 employees. It was a multi-million-dollar operation. So while it wasn't a huge business, it was a decent, smaller business. And so I came to work for him in November. And unfortunately, my dad passed away the following January. So a couple of months later.
And how old was he?
My dad was 47.
Wow.
Massive heart attack.
Oh.
He had uncovered an embezzlement before he died and before I came home to work for him. He had a bookkeeper who had stolen $500,000 from the organization.
Oh my goodness.
Well, he did it by taking withholdings from the employees, money that should have gone to the IRS for their Social Security. And so he embezzled that plus more money out of the company.
Which is going to cost you double, because you're going to have to pay that back.
So the company that I inherited when my dad passed away was in 3 major lawsuits with banks that allowed this guy to take the money the way he did. And so I had the IRS sending me letters intending to levy. So I inherited a business with the death of my father that I didn't know what to do with. You know, I had no real experience.
So what do you do?
I bared down and fought through it. Again, another pivotal moment where I could seek God, get on my hands and knees, my face before him, and ask him, what do you do? Pride set in. I'm going to barrel through this. We're going to make a go of this. We're going to keep these people employed, and we're going to build this empire.
Well, you stay connected with your military training, and I think you're at Fort Benning in Georgia.
Absolutely.
And you get a call that just shocks you.
Yeah, so I had become a paratrooper, and I was at Fort Benning, and I was doing some pre-ranger training, actually. You know, there was nothing but drive in me, man.
So are you jumping out of airplanes?
Jumping out of airplanes, helicopters, anything I could. That was me.
Wow.
And so I ended up getting a phone call. I had some business partners in the printing company at the time, and they called me up and said, you've got to come home. Fort Wayne had experienced a flood. It was a huge amount of rain in the south side of Fort Wayne They called it a 100-year storm, and this was in 2002. We basically had 36 inches of water rush into our printing plant in a matter of 8 minutes.
Which ruins everything that it touches.
I mean, you've got millions of dollars of printing equipment, you've got paper, inventory, jobs in progress. So basically, it forced me to quit the training, come home right away, and figure out what to do. Again, another moment, another choice. I could have shut the business down at that point. But something in me, that pride, that ambition, said, drive on, drive on. So I ended up taking out $1 million loan from the Small Business Administration. They do disaster assistance. Low interest loan for $1 million, just to stay afloat, no puns intended.
How old are you at that time?
At that time, 2002, I would have been early 30, maybe 30 years old, 29.
Young guy to grab that tiger by the tail.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, a lot of money. And at that point in life, I was married, and I actually had gone through a divorce at that point too, or I was in the process of it.
And did you have children?
I had a child.
One child at that point?
A child.
So what happens with the company?
Okay, so with the company, we end up taking $1 million, infusing it back into the business, keeping 30 to 40 families employed at the time. But I wanted to do a couple of different things. So after we got that injection of capital to actually get new equipment and replace some of the product gone, I wanted to diversify. And so I ended up on a quest to buy publishing companies. So at that point, around 2003, I ended up owning a publishing company with a partner of mine.
And you get written up in magazines, and you know, you have that drive and that ambition and the fast and furious, and you're moving up, and but you're still trusting in yourself at that point.
Trusted in myself. I didn't just get written up in magazines. I bought magazines to write up other people in. Okay. I published the Fort Wayne Business Journal, Fort Wayne Woman Magazine, and a few others. And so again, I was trying to build this empire, if you will. But I was building it on the wrong foundation the whole time. Again, more and more choices. But here's what happens. The world doesn't crumble all at once.
Right.
You build and build and build, and then all of a sudden, it's out of control. So at the height of my entrepreneurialism, if you will, I had 3 businesses. I had a multi-million-dollar operation, 50-plus employees, several partners. I'd been divorced once, 1 child. I was beginning another relationship with another child on the way. My life was just going crazy, Mitch. Crazy and out of control at once. Still a paratrooper, still jumping out of planes. And here's the challenge with that. Now, because of my felony in the past, even though my command, the people around me, believed in me, I wasn't really deployable because I had this conviction. And so when they go to...
So it continually haunts you along the way.
Yeah. So now, the thing that I really wanted to do and be, which was a soldier, to serve my country, a patriot, I really couldn't do. Not that I wanted to go to war, but the fact is, I couldn't do what I felt I was supposed to do because of choices I had made in the past.
I've only met a handful of people who tried to be a soldier and an entrepreneur all at the same time. That's really unique. I think that is a picture of your multitasking, moving up the ladder, trusting in yourself life. And I'm not saying everybody I've met who tried to do that was that way, but my point is how unique that is.
Yeah.
That is unique because they both demand almost everything.
Challenging to do.
Yeah.
And you have to have patient people around you on both sides.
Yeah.
The military, they were fairly understanding to a certain degree, you know, allowing me to come home from training because of the flood. My business partners were very understanding for letting me go in the first place. But again, a lot of that was just about me and no one else.
Did you lose your family printing business before the publishing business, or did you roll that into the publishing business?
Well, I kept them separate. They were 2 separate business entities. But the problem is, I was using a lot of the resources from the printing company to float the publishing company, if you will.
And then how does all that work out financially for you?
Yeah, it was challenging. It was. What we were trying to do was diversify, because printing as a traditional business was beginning to dry up, if you will, because of the internet, computers, and technology. And so we wanted to find a way where we could create our own client. And so being a publishing company, selling advertising allowed us to actually create the products that we printed. So we were basically from concept to completion. We had no middleman in the middle. We were unique with respect to other publishing companies. However, that being said, it became very easy for us to rack up a printing bill while we're waiting on ad revenues to come in. So the economy changed everything. So when the recession hit in 2007, I screamed right into that. We were building this business, and we were expecting this payoff down the road. The problem is, what's the first thing businesses did? They pulled away from their marketing.
Yeah, cut their marketing, yeah.
Right. No more advertising, no more printing, no more rich. You know, my business really started closing up. And so we had to make some tough decisions. And so you talk about, again, another point in your life, what do you do? What's your choice? Well, at this very time, now I'm going to fast forwarding again up to 2007,
Sure.
I had gone through another divorce. You can imagine with the drive that's in me and my motivation to succeed, I really wasn't being much of a family person.
No, you're going 100 miles an hour.
100 miles an hour.
2 divorces, 2 children?
2 divorces, 2 beautiful little daughters. Economy tanks. I'm on my hands and knees.
And you're leveraged.
I'm leveraged.
Yeah,
and I got to make a choice this time. At the same time, I'm looking at my daughters, and I'm asking myself, what kind of dad do they deserve? Do they deserve this guy that's looking in the mirror? And they didn't. They deserved a much better dad than I was being to them. I was gone all the time. I was making risky financial decisions with business. I was in the military. I was off doing my thing. I wasn't being the daddy they needed. And so I had to make a choice. Now, I will say this. With the drive I had, I would have been determined to make those businesses last through the recession. I could have done that. But I was tired. And I was worn out. And so some interesting things happened. 2007, we ended up selling our printing company, but really it was pretty much a fire sale, if you will, because we owed the government $1 million. And the government doesn't play around.
No, they don't.
They
come first.
Yeah, and so we paid the government everything we could with the proceeds from the sale of that printing company. Then the publishing company was still around, and I had a couple of partners in the publishing company. I was forced into personal bankruptcy at the time because of with the SBA, you have to personally guarantee everything. So I lost my home, my cars, all of my possessions. I had these 2 girls, and I was actually homeless at that point. So I had to make another decision, and I moved back in with my mom.
Wow.
My mom.
Who you had kind of kept at bay. I know she helped get your attorney when you were in trouble years earlier, but this is kind of a new part of the relationship, beginning of maybe reconciliation.
Restoration.